Jai Hind, Namaste, hello and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav and in this video we'll be discussing selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 10th of October 2020. Now in this video we'll be discussing the following topics. 544 new species discovered in India. So there are two reports by Zoological Survey of India called the Animal Discovery Report and the Botanical Survey of India called the Plant Discovery Report. They have found some new species. So what are those species and any significance of those species we'll see in this report. Then tree transplantation policy, very good initiative by Delhi government. So we'll see what this policy is all about. We'll also understand what is tree transplantation, what is its success rate, how much it costs, and what is special about the policy launched by the Delhi government. Then Rudram missile, very important. This is an Engram missile. So I will tell you what is an Engram missile. It is an anti-radiation missile. So we'll understand what it means and what is its strategic importance. Very important missile. RBI forecasts end to contraction by Q4. So based on the strong reports of green offshoots in the economy of the indicators we got from September month, so RBI is forecasting that this contraction will end soon. Now 2020 Nobel Peace Prize, it was given to World Food Program. So we'll see what is World Food Program. We'll also see the services it does. We'll also look at a brief history of World Food Program and we'll also look at its programs and functions it provides in India. Then Labour Bureau to conduct 3 surveys to assess job situation. Nothing much in this, just that we get to know the kinds of survey they'll be conducting. Kasturi cotton, important that the Indian premium cotton in international cotton market would be now branded as Kasturi cotton. Then there are 2 explainers. Now these 2 issues we have discussed earlier as well, but these issues, one was in Hindu and other was in Indian Express. So we will be discussing this in more depth in this video. We'll discuss the big tech companies, the US Congressional Committee which conducted an inquiry into the workings of 4 big tech companies, Apple, Google, Facebook and Amazon, right? And the scathing remarks they made about their conduct. So we'll see that. It also has an India angle, so we'll discover. Then Kyrgyzstan issue. So we'll again look at the Kyrgyzstan issue. We'll see the players involved, Russian stakes, the states of USA, the stakes of China, and we'll also look at the Kyrgyzstan-India relationship, right? And for your convenience, I've also added timestamps in the description column. So if you want to skip to a particular news, just click on that timestamp and you will reach that particular article. So this is all that we are going to discuss. Now let's get started. Tree transplantation policy. So the government of Delhi has become the first state in India to pass this policy. Now what does this entail? Now whenever there is a construction or developmental project that is taking place in the NCT of Delhi, so some trees have to be cut. So this policy mandates that 80% of the trees that are being cut in an area, they have to be relocated or transplanted to some other area. So this is what is tree transplantation policy, and they tried to do that, but this policy has some challenges as well because the rate of survival of trees is less, about 50%. So they have built in some mechanisms. For example, the agencies that would be undertaking this transplantation work, they would be paid only if 80% of the trees survive after 1 year of the procedure. So then they have built in some mechanisms to ensure the high survivability of the trees. Now on paper, this is a very good scheme. Let us see if it really works out. And this scheme is over and above the existing scheme of Delhi government, in which if any tree is uprooted or cut for any development or construction purpose, then in its place 10 saplings have to be planted. So that will remain, plus the transplantation operation would have to be taken. Now this is important. See, there are many trees which would be 100 years old, 20 years old, 40 years old. Now one cannot equate the bioservices and the ecological services that a fully grown tree provides with 10 saplings, right? It has its own role. So it is very important that these trees are preserved, and this policy intends to do just that. Now this policy also has a mechanism for monitoring this transplantation, and that mechanism comprises of both the government and RWAs and local people to ensure that the process is carried out due diligently. Now let us see. Delhi becomes the first state in India to pass this policy. Now what is tree transplantation? Basically remove tree from one place and then you replant it at some other place. It depends on a number of factors like the soil quality, soil moisture and how well you can keep the tree hydrated. So what is the tree transplantation? It is a process involves uprooting a tree from one particular spot, lifting it and planting it at another spot. I've also found this infographic for you. I'll just discuss this. It is a complicated process with success rate of around 50% and average cost is rupees 1 lakh for an average size tree. And the survival rate of transplanted tree depends on the soil type, and it also depends on how efficiently the roots are isolated and the tree is kept hydrated. So this was what happened during the Pragati Maidan relocation. So these are the steps. First, the trees were identified and the soil around it was moistened for 3 to 4 days. Then the root ball was to be covered with sack and watered during digging. Then cranes lift trees by holding to the branches. See, this is happening here. Then the trees transported, placed in a pit of around 2 meter deep, pit covered with soil and mud to prevent infection, and watered daily and closely monitored for 3 months. But the problem was that the survivability rate was very, very low in this Pragati Maidan project. So that is why they have mandated that payment will be made after a year if 80% trees survive. So what the transplantation policy says, I've already discussed all of these things. 80% of total number of trees to be felled need to be transplanted. 10 times the number of saplings to be planted that I told you. National level agencies that have successfully carried out tree transplantation will be appointed as part of expert panel, and any of the agencies can be chosen from this expert panel for transplantation. Invasive species such as Vilayati kikar and sababul will be excluded from the list of species that will be transplanted. Important point. Survival rate and audits to be carried out after a year to assess which trees were able to withstand the process. Poor survival rate a challenge. The Pragati Maidan project, 2,583 trees were felled, 1,713 were transplanted, and only 573 survived. So you see almost a loss of 2,000 trees, right? And that is a huge, huge loss. Of those, only 36 trees, 2.1% based on health, form and good structure were found viable enough to be transplanted. So see, from 2583 to 36, that is the problem. Now the cost of transplanting, already told you, 50,000 to 1 lakh rupee. What was done earlier, in lieu of every tree cut, compensatory plantation in form of 10 tree samplings. But then again, these saplings, they may take years to replace the felled tree. And that is the problem, because the ecological services provided by a big tree cannot be equated with saplings, right? Now again, what does the policy say? These are the same things. Please take a screenshot and you read it in your leisure time. Panel of agencies. Government will form a panel of agencies that excel in the task of transplantation, and whichever department wants trees to be transplanted can approach any agency out of the panel that is being formed. The payment of the agencies will be made only if 80% of the trees continue to survive after a year. And then there will be a tree transplantation cell for monitoring. A dedicated tree transplantation cell will be formed by the Delhi government and local committees, which will include government officials, citizens, RWAs, to monitor the transplanted trees and certify that the task has been done with due diligence. So a very, very, very good initiative of Delhi government, and let us hope that this initiative is replicated in other states as well. Kyrgyzstan issue. We have already discussed this issue in an earlier video. Now it is time to discuss this issue in detail. So we'll be discussing whatever we have already discussed, but in some more detail. Now till now, what do we know? That Kyrgyzstan is the only democracy in Central Asia, right? To enter the parliament, any party has to get at least 7% of the popular vote. Now what happened recently, there were parliamentary elections, and in those elections, 4 parties won or they entered the parliament. Out of these 4, 3 were pro-Russia or close to Russia, and only 1 prominent or 1 opposition party got place in parliament. And the main opposition party stayed out of elections because it was fighting its own internal strifes, right? Now there were allegations that these polls have been rigged and votes have been bought. So when the results were announced, the people, they rose up in protests and they captured key government buildings, including the parliament and the presidential office, and they have created a sort of a coup situation, and they also released the ex-president who was being held captive, right? Now the election commission of the country it has said that it will be annulling the results of the parliamentary elections. The Prime Minister has already resigned, but the president who won the elections is adamant and he's not ready to leave power, right? He's saying that these opposition parties are trying to create trouble and they're trying to create a coup-like situation, a political coup. But the opposition parties say that the people were not happy and they were mass scale rigging. That is why people have rose up in revolt. Now, this is not the first time that people have revolted in this country. In 2005, there was a tulip revolution, and 2010, there was a melon revolution, again against the incumbent presidents of that time. Now, different countries have different stakes in this region, those being Russia, China, and USA. Russia considers Kyrgyzstan as its strategic backyard, and Kyrgyzstan is one of the 6 members of CTSO. We'll see what is CTSO. And out of these 6 members of CTSO, 3 members are facing problem. One is Kyrgyzstan, other is Belarus, where the incumbent president Lukashenko is not ready to leave power, right? And the third one is Armenia, which is engaged in a conflict with Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh region, right? So these are the problems, 3 front problems that Russia is facing, and Russia does not want to get dragged into this, right? The other player is China. For China, Kyrgyzstan is an important place because it is part of BRI, right? And Kyrgyzstan is virtually in the center of Eurasian region and Central Asia. So Kyrgyzstan is very, very important strategically. Other player being USA. Now, USA had a base in this country till 2014. And in 2014, the current president, he came to power and he's pro-Russia. So he asked them to shut their base, right? So if he goes, then it is advantage USA. Now, India has also had good relations. Since 1991, India has maintained relations, and since 1992, we were one of the first few countries to establish diplomatic relations with Kyrgyzstan, and we have been cooperating on several issues with Kyrgyzstan. And from 2011, we have been conducting Khanjar joint military exercises as well. So our relations are close. The Kyrgyz state supports our Kashmir stand, and it also supports our place for permanent seat in UNSC. So this is all of that we are going to discuss here. Now let us see this article. Protesters in Kyrgyzstan have captured key government buildings, including the Parliament House, the Presidential Office, and the situation is like a coup. The current protests began after early results of parliamentary election were announced. Political parties in Kyrgyzstan should win at least 7% of popular vote to enter parliament. I've told you all of this. The results showed that only 4 parties managed to cross the threshold, and of which 3 were pro-government parties. The only one opposition party could cross the threshold, and this created a problem, and they said that votes were being bought. History of protests. This country has had history of protests. Kyrgyzstan, often referred to as Central Asia's only democracy, had seen violent anti-government protests in the past. In 2005 and 10, sitting presidents were forced out of office in popular protests, the tulip and melon revolution. So these are the names you should know for your PT, right? Current prospects. Even before the election, political fault lines were sharpening in Kyrgyzstan. I told you the principal political party, it boycotted. So the country's main political party, the Social Democratic Party of Kyrgyzstan, stayed out of the election due to intra-party rift and split. Several political leaders were detained and elections were perceived as rigged. Consequently, after election, protesters formed a coordination council to lead the revolution. The country's election commission annulled the result, but the protesters continued. Even the Prime Minister has resigned, but the President remains adamant. Now, what is the government stand led by the President? That opposition is trying to instigate a political coup. And the opposition stand is that the elections were rigged, which made people protest against the establishment. Now, what is Kyrgyzstan's strategic importance? Let's first look at its map. So see, this is Kyrgyzstan, sharing a very long land border with China, right? This is Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So it is virtually in the center of the Central Asian region, and it is connecting China largely to the Central Asian region, right? And it is a key point in the Belt and Road Initiative of China. So that is the importance of this country for China, right? And Russia considers this country as one of its strategic backyards, including Belarus, right? So Russia also wants stability in this region. Now let's see what is the strategic importance. So Kyrgyzstan's strategic importance. It has been key to the strategic plans of both Russia and China. Russia considers the region as its backyard and plays hard politics to retain its influence. Kyrgyzstan is the member of Russia-led Collective Security Treaty Organization, CSTO. Now this is CSTO. Members are Russia, Belarus, Armenia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia and Tajikistan. So 6 members. Out of 6, 3 are having trouble. Armenia, Belarus and Kazakhstan. Armenia is involved in a conflict with Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh region, right? In Belarus, Lukashenko, the president, is not ready to resign and he is dubbed as the last dictator of Europe, right? And in Kazakhstan, this problem has occurred. CSTO is a Russian-led military alliance of 6 former Soviet states that were created in 2002. Its aim is to ensure the collective defense of any member that faces external aggression. While Russia has cultivated strong ties with all political factions in Kyrgyzstan, radical political changes could throw up opportunities for its rivals. Belarus, another country in Russia's backyard with pro-Russian president, is already witnessing political turmoil after August's presidential election. In the South Caucasus, the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, both former Soviet republics, over Nagorno-Karabakh risks dragging Russia into a conflict that Russia doesn't want. So all these 3 are into conflict. All 3 combined, Russia's attempts to build stronger political and economic integration with former Soviet region are suddenly facing critical challenges. Now what are China's stakes? This landlocked country of Central Asia shares a long border like I showed you in the map with China. It is located at the center of Eurasia and is a vital link in its Belt and Road Initiative. In 2019, President Xi also visited Bishkek and it shows close link with the current establishment. China has built roads and rail networks with Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. Now USA also had a sort of base here, but it was shut in 2014. I've already told you before in the video we discussed. During the early stages of the Afghan war, USA had used Kyrgyzstan for refueling and other logistical purposes because it is right in the middle of Eurasia and Central Asia. The base was shut down in 2014 by Parliament. A regime change can be favorable for the USA. Now India-Kyrgyzstan. India has enjoyed strong bilateral tie with Kyrgyzstan since 1991. India was one of the first countries to establish diplomatic ties with Kyrgyzstan in 1992. Since 1992, the 2 countries have many agreements including on culture, trade, economic cooperation, civil aviation and etc. And from 2011, we are conducting joint military exercises called Khanjar, right? And the Kyrgyz leaderships have been largely supportive of India's stand on Kashmir, and they also support India's bid for permanent seat at UNSC. Now, departure from a democratic regime may bring uncertainty for India's interests. So these are India's interests in the region. There's also Indian diaspora. Around 9,000 Indian students are studying medicine in various medical institutions. And there are many businessmen living in Kyrgyzstan, Indian businessmen who are involved in trade and several other services, right? So this is all about the trouble in Kyrgyzstan. And we saw the role of different players, and also we saw the Indian stakes in the region. Big tech companies and monopolies. So if you remember, we have already discussed this once before, that a US House of Representatives panel, it studied the workings of these 4 big corporates, Google, Apple, Facebook and Amazon, and then they had some scathing remarks about their workings, right? So now they have submitted the detailed report, and this investigation was done in a bipartisan manner. That means both Democrats and Republicans were on board into this investigation, and they took more than 15 months to finalize this report. Now this report makes some big points and big remarks about the workings of these companies. This report has said that these companies are acting in a very anti-competitive spirit. The heads of these companies were called for questioning, but their responses were evasive. These companies are acting as gatekeepers to the key distribution channels. So they decide who gets to where, right? They also control access to market, and in the sense they decide who would be a winner and who would be a loser. They have tremendous power and they charge exorbitant prices. For example, we discuss how Google is asking for Indian startups and companies to pay 30%, and it is forcing them to use the Google Pay mechanism for billing. If you take any digital service of any startup on the Google Play Store, then Google mandates that you have to pay through the Google billing system, and in the process, Google is taking a cut of 30% from Indian startups, right? So it is one of those instances. Not only that, they also have oppressive contract terms, right? And they also extract valuable data both from the customers and the companies that rely on them. Then these all have created marketplaces on their own platforms, and they also compete in those marketplaces. For example, if you go to Amazon, so there is something called Amazon Basics, and they have low prices and they have high ratings. Those ratings are also inflated. We'll discuss about those ratings some other day, because though these ratings are fake ratings, right? So they decide that who is going to buy what, and they push their own product, right? And they also indulge in predatory pricing. So for them it is win all, and on top of that, they acquire any form of competition that they deem even remotely a threat. So this is what the committee has said. I am not saying anything, right? So let us now, I have given you what the committee said. It also gave instance of India where antitrust proceedings are going on against Google, and we also studied that recently antitrust proceedings have again been initiated against Google for its anti-competition practices, and it is forcing the TV manufacturers to use the Android as per Google demands, right? So these are some of the things. So let us now see what the report is saying. So House of Representatives, they submitted their bipartisan investigative report in the working of technology companies like Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook. It called for the big technology companies to be broken up, and also for a presumptive prohibition against future mergers and acquisitions by the dominant platform. These companies have been on the government radar in many countries for being big spenders and trying to steamroll competition by either buying out their rivals or pushing vendors to avoid working with their competitors. I've told you all of this. As a part of reviewing the state of competition online, the US House panel probed these companies and looked into how they controlled the flow of data for themselves as well as their competition. Now the findings. Company heads were questioned over their evidence, which suggested that companies have exploited, entrenched, expanded their power over digital marketplace and anti-competitive and abusive ways, and the answers by heads were often evasive and non-responsive. This aspect raises questions on the powers assumed by big tech companies and whether they consider themselves beyond the reach of democratic oversight. So this is true. Each of these companies act as a gatekeeper or a key channel of distribution, which means that they have full control over what goes on in their respective domains. For example, Facebook and Twitter, they are censoring what Trump is saying, right? Now, I'm not a Trump supporter, but these companies, they should not have the power to censor the president of any country, be it America, be it India. They should not have that power, right? But they are exercising that in US. Imagine. By controlling access to markets, they can pick winners and losers throughout the economies. These companies not only wield tremendous power, but they also abuse it by charging exorbitant fees, imposing oppressive contract terms, and extracting valuable data from the people and businesses that rely on them. I told you these points. Companies ran marketplace for their respective domains while also competing in it, and to ensure they retain the number one position, the company is restored to self-preferencing, predatory pricing, and exclusionary conduct. Now, what is self-preferencing? Involves actions by an undertaking which are designed to favor its own product or services over those of its competitors. Like I said, that they have higher ratings, right? Predatory pricing is an act of setting prices low in an attempt to eliminate the competition. Now, companies like Amazon, to push their own product, they can do that because they have deep pockets, right? Exclusionary conduct is a conduct that creates or maintains monopoly power by disadvantaging and harming competitors. So this is what the report has said, that these practices are being conducted by these big companies. Now, what were the recommendations? To push for structural separation of the big tech companies, which is next to impossible because these are just recommendations. They are not binding neither on the government nor on the companies, but they will just get a conversation started in different circles. These companies should be broken into smaller companies to ensure that they would not be able to have as much influence as they have currently over the digital marketplace. These companies should be prohibited from operating in an adjacent line of business. Adjacent business is to leverage a business' existing capabilities and applying them to a distinctly new market which is close in proximity to the existing business. For example, Facebook acquiring Instagram. So those are closely linked, right? There should be a presumptive prohibition against big tech companies going for mergers and acquisitions because that leads to cartelization and monopolization of the market. For example, Facebook bought Instagram and WhatsApp and has been accused of using money power to outright buy competition and then pushing them aggressively against other competitors. Big tech influence in India. The report also mentions the role of big tech companies in stifling competition in India. It refers to various antitrust probes going on against Google in India, which has had run-ins with the regulators, especially the Competition Commission of India. In the last 2 years, Competition Commission of India has raised issues with Google's commercial flight search option, its dominant position in the search marketplace, the abuse of its dominant position in the Android phone and smart television market, and others. As I told you that Google is facing 4 major antitrust cases in India. In 2019, Google was held guilty for misuse of its dominant position in mobile Android market for imposing unfair conditions on device manufacturers to prevent them from using other operating systems. Right? So if you see, there are only 2 big operating systems in the world right now. One is Android and other is iOS, and if any other operating system even has to come up, then they have to provide a space. For example, there was an opportunity when Google tried to ban, under the US government pressure, Google tried to ban its operating system on Huawei. So Huawei could have developed a new operating system. Now that is another ball game, that it would have been Chinese, but these are some of the problems, right? So there should be space for others, but then who would take a new operating system? For example, there are some like Ubuntu and others, but nobody is ready to accept them on a mass scale. Google has also been accused of following a high and unfair commission mechanism for apps listed on its Play Store. Case in point, India, 30%. Amazon and Facebook, which are trying to enter the retail space in India, are also likely to be under lens for the way they price their products and the space they deny to their competition. So these are the antitrust and anti-competition practices that are being carried on by these 4 big companies. I'm surprised that Microsoft's name is not there, but these are the 5-6 big companies in the world that influence everything, right? So this is the report of US Congressional Committee. Rudram 1 N-gram missile. So another missile test, right? We have been testing many missiles in the light of the standoff with China, right? So we are also sending them a message. Now this is the latest test that has been successfully carried out by DRDO, again indigenous technology, and this is very important. This does not cause blasts in the conventional sense of way, but still it is a very vital missile because it would disable the enemy air defense system and communication system. And as you know, the future warfare is all about technology. So if we are able to disable the technology of the opponent, we already have the upper hand. So this missile is very important on that count. So let us see what Rudram 1 is all about. Now this missile is very important for Air Force in terms of SEAD, which means suppression of enemy air defense. So if we are able to do that, we can minimize our own casualties, right? We can save aircraft and we can save lives, which is more important, right? And this missile was launched from Sukhoi MKI-30, but it can be adapted for other aircraft as well. Now let us look into the nitty-gritties of this missile. So DRDO successfully test fired the new generation anti-radiation missile N-gram. We have recently tested BrahMos, right? Rudram 1. The weapon hit with pinpoint precision after the weapon hit target with pinpoint precision after Sukhoi Su-30 MKI fighter aircraft launched it. It is the first indigenous anti-radiation missile. Now what is an anti-radiation missile? These missiles are designed to detect, track and neutralize the adversary's radar, communication assets and other radio frequency sources which are generally part of their air defense systems. Now this missile also uses some unique form of navigation. It has INS in conjunction with GPS, right? Now what is INS? I'll tell you. Such a missile's navigation mechanism comprises an inertial navigation system, INS, a computerized mechanism that uses changes in the object's own position coupled with GPS, which is satellite based. So as the missile changes its course in air because of air friction or some other reason, it could divert, right? So INS calculates that. You can imagine it to be like a gyroscope which adjusts its position, right? And this works in conjunction with the GPS to enable it to hit targets with pinpoint precision. For guidance, it has passive homing head, a system that can detect, classify, and engage targets over a wide band of frequencies as programmed. So it can target a wide band of frequencies, right? And even if the target frequency is shut off, it can still hit it. Once the Rudra missile locks on the target, it is capable of striking accurately even if the radiation source switches off in between. The missile has an operational range of more than 100 km based on the launch parameters from fighter jet. While the system has been tested from Sukhoi 30 MKI, it can be adapted for launch from other fighter jets too. I've already told you all of this. Now, how significant are such missiles in aerial warfare? Like I said, for SEAD, that is suppression of enemy air defense capability. As one of the many aspects of SEAD tactics, anti-radiation missiles are used mainly in the initial part of air conflict to strike at the air defense assets of the enemy, and also in later parts, leading to higher survivability to a country's own aircraft. Neutralizing or disrupting the operations of the adversary's early warning radars, command and control systems, surveillance systems that use radio frequencies and give inputs for anti-aircraft weaponry can be very crucial. The scientist said that modern day warfare is more and more network centric, which means it comprises elaborate detection, surveillance, and communication systems that are integrated with the weapon system. And once you disable one part of the network, you practically disable the entire network, right? And you have a significant upper hand. So this is very, very important, and more so it is a indigenous design. And we discussed that our defense minister said that India has the potential to be one of the top 5 defense exporters. So if we carry on with such developments, we can make that dream come true real time soon. Nobel Peace Prize 2020. So this year the Peace Prize has gone to World Food Programme, which is a specialized body of the UN. Now we'll get to know what is World Food Programme, why does the world need a body called World Food Programme, and the activities of World Food Programme in India. And this is one of the least controversial Nobel Peace Prizes in recent history, right? So let us see. The World Food Programme has won the Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to combat hunger, for its contribution for bettering conditions for peace in conflict-affected areas, and for acting as a driving force in efforts to prevent the use of hunger as a weapon of war and conflict. So not only is it feeding the people, but it is also helping the regions in the state of conflict and war. So this is what the Nobel Committee said in its citation. Until the day we have medicinal vaccine, food is the best vaccine against chaos. Very, very important line. You could expect question like this in mains, where they would just quote this line and they would ask you specific questions, right? Now, what is the World Food Programme? This was established in 1961 on the suggestions of the then US President Dwight Eisenhower, and he wanted to provide food aid through a UN system. Now, months after it was set up in 1961, it was faced with a humanitarian crisis in Boin Zara in northern Iran, and it supplied tons of wheat, sugar, and tea. Then it played an important role in providing aid in Thailand and Algeria. Its headquarters is in Rome, Italy, and it became a full-time member of UN in 1963, and it also launched its first development program in 1963 for Nubians in Sudan. Now this body is governed by an executive board which consists of 36 member states, and it is headed by an executive director who is appointed jointly by the UN Secretary General and the Director General of FAO of the United Nations. And the executive director is appointed for a fixed 5-year term, right? In 1963, it launched its first school meals program in Togo, and like I told you, it became a full-fledged member in 1963. Now, this Rome-based organization says that it helps some 97 million people in about 88 countries each year, and that 1 in 9 people worldwide still do not have enough to eat. So this is a sorry state of affairs, and please pay attention and please keep in mind whenever you waste food in future, please think of these people. So value your food. We are very, very lucky people to be living in this world and having warm food on our plates. So let us have compassion for other people. Now, why does the world need a food program? So basically, eradicating hunger is one of the UN's SDG goals to be achieved by 2030. Now, we all know it won't be achieved, but still setting a target is important so that we act in pursuance of that target, right? So the World Food Program is UN's primary agency that works towards that sustainable development goal. According to WFP, there are 690 million hungry people around the world, and around 60% of them live in countries affected by conflict. And this COVID crisis has increased and exacerbated the problem of hunger in the world. And then again, WFP has acted beautifully in this crisis as well. The number of hungry people is expected to increase further due to COVID-19 pandemic. The WFP estimates suggest that by 2030, nearly half of the global poor will be living in fragile and conflict-affected situations. So the future is bleak. So my dear students, make sure that you make yourself to be valuable members of the society so that our society and our world goes in the right direction. It says people living in countries with long-running crises are more than twice as likely to be undernourished than people elsewhere. And if you remember, we did a report which found a correlation between conflict and poverty, the World Bank report, and it said that poverty has increased many folds in the conflict-ridden zones, and it gave the example of Syria. So where there is poverty, there is also hunger, right? Now, what is WFP's role in India? It has been working in India since 1963 when it became a full-fledged UN member. And apart from focusing on reforms on the Targeted Public Distribution System or the TPDS, it provides policy inputs, advocacy and technical assistance for improving access to food. And it has proposed some unique initiatives like Annapurti, which is like a food dispenser machine, right? And mobile storage units for effective implementation of TPDS. Now, Annapurti, like I told you, it is a food dispensation machine. So Annapurti allows beneficiaries to withdraw their food grain quota accurately and at time of their choice. So you don't need to have a ration shop, right? Not a brick and clean situation. You just need to install this machine, and they don't need to interface with the shopkeeper. Just they would go, they would put their Aadhaar or whatever option the state government gives them, and then they can take out their food. It can dispense 2 commodities at a speed of 25 kg. Now this speed is irrelevant. You can take a screenshot and read it. Now in India, it has completed a pilot on rice fortification used in government's midday meal schemes, right? And like I said, it is also working proactively during the COVID pandemic. So it has worked with central and state governments. It has signed an MOU with Uttar Pradesh State Rural Livelihood Mission. Under the agreement, it will provide technical assistance for setting up supplementary nutrition production units in 18 districts for supply of quality food to about 33 lakh beneficiaries of the Anganwadi scheme, the Integrated Child Development Services. We have discussed this scheme earlier as well, right? It has also prepared guidance note for reopening of schools during pandemic. So it is working proactively in the pandemic, and it also runs a logistics service, and this service has proved very helpful during this pandemic. So it runs a logistics service that dispatched medical cargoes to over 120 countries throughout the pandemic to help governments and health partners fighting COVID-19. It has also provided passenger services to ferry humanitarian and health workers where commercial flights were unavailable. WFP has been given the Nobel Prize for 2020. RBI forecasts end to contraction by Q4. Now the RBI is making these statements based on the strong signals that we have seen. For example, the green shoots in the economy. We saw how the manufacturers PMI has gone up and how the service PMI has also gone closer to growth range, right? So there are some green shoots. We also saw manufacturing taking up, and we also saw that electricity demand has also gone up, right? So these are the green shoots in the economy. So if there is no second wave and all the restrictions are removed, then there could be growth. So the RBI governor has said the same thing. So the governor Shanti Kanta Das predicts 9.5% decline in real GDP, keeps key policy rates unchanged in the face of high inflation. RBI reiterated its resolve to revive growth impulses in the economy and mitigate the COVID-19 pandemic's worst impacts by extending its accommodative policy stance for rest of this year as well as for 2021-22. And they also came out with 3 immediate steps as part of their accommodative policy. That is, they're going for somewhat monetary expansionist policy, right? To induce more mobility in the market and also to enable borrowing for the central and state governments, while also ensuring that there is no long-term impact and no price instability in the market. A look at some of the key announcements made by the RBI. Repo rate will remain unchanged at 4%. Accommodative stance towards growth will be extended next year. Risk weightages for home loans have been rationalized to spur job-intensive realty sector. Real-time gross settlement or the RTGS payment to go 24/7 from December 2020, and GDP to contract by 9.5%. World Bank said 9.6%, we discussed in yesterday's video, right? Now the governor has said that barring the incidence of second wave, India stands poised to shrug off the deathly grip of virus and renew its tryst with pre-COVID growth trajectory. Now 3 immediate measures were announced to ease liquidity, allowing banks to hold more SLR holdings till maturity for securities purchased in the second half of 2020 and 21. Targeted long-term repo operations for up to 1 lakh crore with tenures up to 3 years, and open market operations in state development loans as special case. These steps ought to allay market concerns about illiquidity and absorptive capacity for the total government borrowing in the current year. I know some of these things might not be making sense to you because probably you are not acquainted with economics and the concepts involved. Just give me some time because there is so much work for me. I will find time and I will make a video about the basic concepts of economy so that you don't face problems, especially while going through newspapers and what they are trying to say, right? Now, growth may return. As per governor, growth may break out of contraction mode by January-March 21 quarter as silver linings are visible from September's economic indicators as well as COVID-19 caseload curve. So, caseload curve is coming down, right? RBI to facilitate borrowings. Large borrowings to be facilitated for the center and state in the second half of 2020-21. RBI assured that this would be completed in a non-disruptive manner without compromising on price and financial stability. So I told you this thing, right? So for now, just try to get a hang of it. Nothing more to it and you won't be losing anything. These are just generic statements. See what happens in economics. They say simple things in very convoluted terms so that it is heavy on your ear, but once you understand the concepts of economics, it is never heavy on your head. So I will find some time and I will try to make this concept simple for you, because if I go on explaining repo, reverse repo, everything, then it will extend the time of this video, and many of you have been complaining that these videos are too long, but sometimes the topics require that videos have to be long. I'm trying to make them short, but I also want to ensure that I convey the right message across to you, right? Labour Bureau to conduct 3 surveys to assess job situation. So this is just a factual thing. We'll just quickly go through it. The most important point is that for the first time, they are also going to do a survey on domestic workers, right? The Labour Bureau will conduct 3 surveys on migration, domestic workers and professional bodies. So these are the 3 bodies or the categories of workers for which they will be conducting the survey for assessing their employment situation, especially in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. Now they have formed an expert group for a period of 3 years to provide technical guidance to the Labour Bureau with respect to surveys on migration, professional bodies, domestic workers and other surveys. Now about the surveys. The migration survey to be undertaken by Labour Bureau will provide estimates of the number of migrant workers in the country along with an assessment of the issues being faced by them. Now it is important because we all saw what happened to migrant laborers. So to ensure that this does not happen in future, we need to have a proper survey, and based on those surveys, we could be making plans how to deal with migrant worker problems in future. The panel has been asked to collect data on domestic workers, who constitute roughly 3% of workers in the country. So how many? 3%, making it a first of its kind survey on domestic workers to be carried out by the Labour Bureau. For the survey on professional bodies, the government said that given the high proportion of employment generated in professions like chartered accountant, lawyers and doctors, there is a need to undertake periodic estimation of the employment created in such professions. So the most important point here is that the survey would be conducted on domestic workers and number 2 on the migrant laborers, right? So this is what the survey would do. Once they conduct the survey, we'll discuss the reports. 544 new species discovered in India. So these are two reports by the Zoological Survey of India and Botanical Survey of India called the Animal Discoveries Report, which is by Zoological, and Plant Discoveries Report, which is by Botanical, right? Now they have been publishing these reports since 2007 and this is the 13th edition of these reports. Now these reports basically tell us that what new species of fauna and flora they have discovered in India for a particular year. Now these are some of the examples. For example, this is a frog which was found in Jharkhand. Then this gecko was found in Western Ghats. Then this is a kind of ginger that has been found in Nagaland. So let us see about the reports. New species discovered in country last year included 364 animal and 180 plant. Animal discoveries. So this is again by Zoological. 368 faunal species new to science and 116 species spotted for the first time in India. So spotted for the first time in India means that these species have been documented but they have never been seen in India. Plant discoveries 2019. So 180 new plant species and 73 spotted for the first time. Now something special that among these plant species, there are plants which have horticulture value and those which can also serve as alternative foods. So they also have an economic value, right? Now the number of plant species found in India as per this compilation is 50,000 something, which is roughly 12% of all flora species in the world. Again, this is an important point that the flora species found in India account for 12% of all flora species in the world. Now new discoveries include the rock-dwelling gecko from Western Ghats, then the frog from Jharkhand and wild ginger from Nagaland. Kasturi cotton. So very good news. Now India's premium cotton would be branded as Kasturi cotton in the international market for cotton trade, right? So the Union Minister for Textiles unveiled a brand and a logo for Indian cotton recently on the occasion of 2nd World Cotton Day on 7th of October, right? The branding Kasturi cotton would initially be applicable to long staple cotton that is grown in India and meets prescribed standards. Now India's premium cotton would be known as Kasturi cotton in the world cotton trade. The brand will represent whiteness, brightness, softness, purity, luster, uniqueness and Indianness. So these are all the qualities associated with the Kasturi brand. Cotton in India. Cotton is one of the principal commercial crops of India and it provides livelihood to about 6 million cotton farmers. India is the second largest cotton producer and largest consumer of cotton in the world. And there was also a question about cotton in this year's prelims. India produces about 6 million tons of cotton every year, which is about 23% of world's cotton. And India also produces about 51% of total organic cotton production of the world, which demonstrates India's efforts towards sustainability. So these are important things, right? Now, Cot Ally app. So they have also launched a Cot Ally app. Further leveraging the technology, a mobile app, Cot Ally, has been developed by Cotton Corporation of India for providing latest news regarding weather conditions, crop situations, and best farm practices to the respected farmers. So this is about Kasturi cotton and Cot Ally app. So folks, this is all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and please press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new videos that we post. Also, if you like our video, please give us a thumbs up and please do connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. So see you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.